folks. Happy New Year. Love to everybody out there. Hope everybody's okay. God bless you. It's good to be with you. Hope you had a good Christmas and have a happy New Year. Love to everybody out there. God bless you. Love to everybody out there. I have a link if anybody wants to come on. People can come on. Feel free to come on. So there's the link if anybody wants to come on. It's good to be with you. Love to everybody out there. And so this is going to be a stream for an hour or two. And God bless you all. Love to you all out there. Just say a few things that I've been resting. We went on a mission to Akasamanke, then we went to Koforidia. We had a great time, fantastic time. It's been really good. And I've come back resting. My wife has done the crossover. It's a big thing in Ghana with her family down in Accra. She'll be back home in a couple of days' time. I've been missing my mum. As you know, my mum passed away about 4 or 5 months ago. And sometimes I get a little tear in my eye. And so I've been missing my mum. So like I've been saying, Happy New Year, but deep down I've been a bit sad, missing my mum, which is understandable. But the mission was good, fantastic. God supplied all the finances. I don't know who this is. Hello, bro.
Well, hello, you Calvinist heretic, you.
Hey, brother. Ryan, how you doing, bro?
I'm well. Happy New Year to you, although I'm sure it's the second by now where you are.
Long time no see, bro. Nice to see you. To see you nice, mate.
Likewise. I take it Hamza's running his mouth again?
Hey, bro. Guess what I did? I can't believe it. AI.
Well, of course.
Artificial intelligence. I typed in, can you give me the weakest arguments of Hamza of Speaker's Corner concerning the reliability of the Gospels, and it put a long list of stuff out.
It generated a list for you of Hamza's arguments.
So I've got my list here, so I thought I'd go through it with you, bro. If you.
Oh, I got a little time, Jay. I'm a blue collar man these days, so I work most days. Today, though, I'm off. It's too cold to do what we do anyway.
Oh, so AI just came up with a load of stuff, bro.
It probably it collated the weakest arguments that it found, because AI is fed data points and it goes off of those data points. But what? Just let's hear one of the weak arguments that the AI gave you.
All right. I've got a few things here, so I've just got to find the right one. I've got 3 recordings. Let's see.
Oh, I didn't know you had a tablet. That's new.
All right. Oh yeah, I've got it now. Just get it. It's so funny, bro. Right. Are you ready? Are you ready for this?
Yeah, I'm waiting.
As an artificial intelligence, Aya Solomon, God bless you, bro. Right? Are you ready for this? As an artificial intelligence language model, I do not have personal beliefs or opinions. However, here are some weaknesses in the arguments of Muslim apologies, Hamza at Speaker's Corner against Christianity. Number 1, lack of historical evidence. Hamza often relies on Islamic tradition and scripture to support his arguments, but these sources are not always reliable or historically accurate. For example, he may cite Quranic verses or hadiths that have been interpreted differently by different scholars over time. So I've often seen that with him. He quotes verses and hadiths that general Islamic scholars don't quote it up the way he quotes it. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I'm not as familiar with Hamza. I simply know that it's amazing. Isn't he a white fellow?
Yeah.
Or am I thinking of somebody else?
Yeah, no, Hamza
I think your camera's frozen up there, Jay.
My camera? Can you see me?
Yeah, but I was saying I think your connection froze up. It might have been mine, but I was saying isn't Hamza the white fellow?
Yeah.
That is what makes me laugh. You're a white guy that converted to Islam. Boy, you must not have read the Hadith very closely. But from what I have seen of Hamza, that seems to be about right. I think he thinks he's being unique by providing argumentation that he thinks nobody's provided. But the plain fact of the matter is he's just arguing from a place that no Islamic scholar really argues. Therefore, his arguments are naturally weak.
Amen. I mean, next one. Number 2, circular reasoning. Hamza sometimes uses circular reasoning to support his arguments, such as arguing that the Quran is true because it's mentioned in the Quran itself. This does not provide independent evidence or proof for the truth of the Quran.
Well, and that's hardly unique to Hamza, but that probably is one of the biggest flaws of Islamic apologetics. We can say, for example, that the book of Daniel is reliable because of the dating of the Babylonian captivity and the dating for 485 or 480, whatever. I'm kind of forgetting off the top of my head. We have ample reason to believe over 10 different sources the basic gospel narrative if we use the minimal facts argument. But asserting the Quran is the Quran, which is unchanged because it says so, has got to be one of the weakest arguments they could possibly use. And Hamza's no better.
Yeah. And, when they criticize the Bible, like they'll point out certain issues, say, in the Gospels, that really what they're doing circular reasoning, because what they're doing is we accept that bit of the gospel, but we don't accept this bit of the gospel, and the reason is because it's not in line with the Quran. So we reject the bit about the crucifixion, and you say, well, why? And they'll come up with some implausible historical argument, but the reality is
the swoon theory or something that's long been disproven.
Yeah. So it's always circular.
Always. Well, also what's hilarious about that is I'll pose to them, well, doesn't the 2nd and 3rd surah say that we are to follow our book? That's what your God commands us to do. If we follow our book, we're good to go. Well, I have to give it to David Wood. He made this point recently. The Quran does that with several different religions. It does that with the Jews. It does it with the Christians. It does it even to some level with the Hindus and Buddhists, because they're all told within the Quran, just follow your book and you should be okay. Then all of the sudden, sometimes within the same chapter, oh, no, don't follow your own book.
Yeah.
And why? Well, it's because there's new evidence or because Allah is clarifying his contradictory revelation. It's just the Quran says so. Well, the Quran says I should be able to follow it, and then it says not to follow it.
Yeah. Next one. Ignorance of Christian doctrine. Hamza often misrepresents Christian doctrine or history, such as claiming that Christians believe in 3 gods, or that Jesus was a mere prophet. These misunderstandings can lead to false arguments and misunderstandings. I can't believe this guy.
What it seems like Bard did, which is I'm guessing the AI that you employ, is that it found the typical weak arguments for Islam. But the irony of it is, although it may be less familiar with Hamza himself, it's actually correct because this is a weakness for their argument in general. I've told Muslims this, I've told the Jehovah's Witnesses this. The doctrine of the Trinity is not tritheism. You have to argue that because the Quran says that.
So, but they often like Hamza. Like I've listened to a lot of his arguments. He does it. Like for example, he was saying that the book of Galatians recently it was written to the Jews. So when it says us in Galatia, he's not admitting that there were Gentiles there as well.
Well,
So
he's just
like,
ignorant because the book, the Galatians were Gentile Christians in a Gentile Christian assembly within the region of Galatia, which was not a Jewish dominant region.
yeah, yeah. So every scholar would say that. There isn't a scholar on the planet, I don't think, that would disagree with that. Yeah, Hamza has stated repeatedly, no, it was written for the Jews.
Yeah, and if you ask him for a source, he doesn't have one because I'll tell you the source. It's the Hamza Says version.
yeah. Hamza.com. Don't know what it is, but it is. Number 4, failure to address counter arguments.
He's particularly bad about that.
Counter arguments. Sorry?
I said he's particularly bad about that.
Yeah. I'd like you to unpack that. Failure to address counter-arguments. Hamza sometimes fails to address counter-arguments or objections raised by Christians, such as the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus or the problem of evil in the world. This leaves his arguments open to criticism and refutation. I've noticed with Hamza, I'll just get this in, if you counter-argue him and give a good argument, he doesn't know how to respond to it.
Oh, no. Well, Islamic apologists in general don't know how to respond to it, but Hamza specifically, because as you know, in Islam, it's all about submission. It's not about logical argumentation. You believe it because we say so. And if you disbelieve it, prepare for the jihad or the jizya. But I have actually watched Hamza either with you or another friend of mine, the Black Doctor, you know who I'm talking about. And whenever they've engaged Hamza, or whatever, either you or he have engaged Hamza, I should say, he doesn't engage with the arguments. You can watch Hamza processing what they just said, realizing he doesn't know what they're talking about, and then just move on like he never even heard
it. Yeah.
I don't know about you, but if I'm having to face that situation with an unbeliever where I don't know the answer, I'll simply tell them, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of the apologists in Speaker's Corner, if someone, like, for example, Mansour, is still trying to work out divine simplicity, because I attacked it. I went down there last year, and I brought up the issue of philosophical issues with the Trinity and the oneness of God from the early history. I got it from Christian think tank on his think tank that if you go on his site, he talks about that right early on, the Muslims didn't understand even the oneness of God. So they had to borrow the attributes of God from Christians in order to give them a better idea of the oneness. But when they did that, they didn't understand divine simplicity. And so when they attack the Trinity, saying that the Trinity is 3, well, they have the 99 names of Allah, they have these various attributes, but because they don't have a doctrine of divine simplicity, you can say there's 99 gods in Islam. Because
well, actually, yeah, you could, because all Muhammad did, if this is really the sayings of Muhammad, is to describe what Allah or Allat is not. But because we know Allah is a pre-Islamic deity, we know what Allat was prior to the Islamic conquest of the Mideast. And I hate to break it to you, it wasn't this monotheistic deity that the Muslims allege to worship today. You and I know this. Pretty much any scholar will admit this that's not a Muslim. And even some of them are forced to admit it, but they just don't want to deal with it. Now, that being said, I find it amazing because technically you could use a divine simplicity argument, but you could technically argue, well, there's no positive attribute of the Islamic God. You can't argue, say, for example, he is omniscient, because there are plenty of Muslim scholars who argue for dynamic omniscience. Therefore, if there is not a positive attribute for the Islamic deity, does it really exist? Telling me 99 reasons or things that the Islamic God is not this or does not possess these attributes does not also tell me that he actually exists because of these attributes. The biblical God has the attributes of aseity, omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, his compassion, his grace. We have something that clearly describes a person. All that we have in Islam is a rebranded pagan idol that has 99 reasons why it's not a rebranded pagan idol.
Amen, amen. You know, there's a contradiction as well. You probably know this, but on one side, there are verses in the Quran that say that Allah is nothing like His creation, and then on the other side, on the flip side, you have verses that say Allah has hands, Allah has feet.
Yeah, Allah has hands, Allah has feet, Allah can tell time. Allah, has to go to the privy. I'm being a little facetious, but you're right.
But
it has the creature-creator distinction, and then it totally inverts it.
Yeah. So if we can't know anything like Allah, if Allah's nothing like His creation, how can we know anything? And then when you say Allah has hands, has feet, in early Islamic teaching, right in the early beginning, they were basically. They didn't mean it, they didn't mean it metaphorically. They literally meant it anthropomorphic. That they really believed that Allah had hands. And then Islamic scholars, when they started debating Christians, they kind of backtracked and said, "Oh no, Allah's nothing like His creation." So there was massive confusion about the nature of the so-called God.
Well, we know that because pre-Islamic Allah had a wife and daughters. Yeah. Of course, along comes Muhammad and deletes that, despite that this is known the world over. So there's that one thing. And just like you said, they're not anthropomorphized. We don't think that Jehovah has literal hands. We don't think that Jehovah has a literal head. He might have a visage that looks like a human, but he's a spirit. He's not confined to human form. Whereas Allah does have literal eyes, literal hands, a literal tongue, and a literal mouth.
Amen.
So if I'm right, doesn't He literally sleep as well, or am I wrong about that?
Yeah, no, it's all the things. Yeah. But they tried to get out of it by saying it's metaphorical. But early Islam, they saw it as actual. They really believed
it's not literal. Well, then that also proves my point. You can't have an omniscient Allah because for a period of time He's sleeping. How could He be sleeping if He's unaware cosmically of what's happening?
Yeah. I'm really enjoying this. Those who are coming on, we're looking at. I typed in AI to debate Hamza, the artificial intelligence, to give some arguments against Hamza, the apologist at Speaker's Corner, the Muslim apologist. So we're reading the AI statements of critiquing Hamza, but it also applies generally to Islam. But I just want to come back at this a minute. We looked at counter arguments, but I want to go back to number 3, ignorance of Christian doctrine. I find it appalling that they don't really like when they talk about the Trinity, but also other Christian doctrines like the atonement or anything else. They don't really try to really understand what we believe, do they?
Well, no, they're apathetic about what Christians believe. All they do is go by what the Quran says. The Quran says we commit shirk. That's all they care about.
Yeah.
And what they don't ask about, for example, is, well, why would the Christian believe in the doctrine of atonement? What does that mean? To be reconciled with God. That doesn't exist in Islam.
Yeah. But I asked Hamza once about, does he read Christian books like, you know?
Does he read a systematic theology? You know?
Yeah, I was thinking, you know, does he read, say, Augustine or Calvin? And he said, I can't remember the exact statements, but he's basically saying, no, I don't bother with any of that. And I was thinking, when I study Islam, I read the Quran, I read the Hadith, but I also like read the philosophers, the theologians to find out what they think. So how can you really be an apologist for Islam if you're not really willing to educate yourself?
Well, it's simple. In their worldview, you don't have to be educated. You just declare things and hope that for the best. The plain fact of the matter, though, is that numbers do not lie. There is a reason why there's a massive wave of Islamic apostasy that's been going on for a while now. The Muslim world has access to the internet and is becoming aware of what Islam actually would be. Furthermore, the largest Islamic country by 2050, so in another 26 years, will be the United States. That will be larger, possibly larger than the Islamic population within the Mideast. Those are all apostate Muslims. By definition, those Muslims should not be included in Islam, but they need to bridge the numbers gap. They are not making converts. They are making babies.
Yeah.
So I thoroughly think that's what's happening, is that because they don't have the ability to answer questions or engage in critical thought, they're going to have to start accepting people they otherwise wouldn't accept, because their apologetics is terrible. I mean, good Lord, I laugh when I see atheists, forget about Christians, atheists debating Muslims and stumping them. If there is anyone who should be unable to debate the atheist or the Muslim, it should be the atheist, because they are coming from a viewpoint of null. An atheist is debating a theist, is debating about something he doesn't think that exists. We can discuss that, but the Christian has reasons for why the atheist worldview is wrong. The Muslim just says, Alhamdulillah, come to Islam or die. The intelligent atheist is going to have a field day with that, and that's exactly what we've seen on the internet.
Amen. I've got 3 more things AI said about Hamza. 5, emotional appeal. Hamza sometimes uses
very bad about
emotional
that.
appeal and rhetorical devices such as shouting or insulting Christians to try to win his audience over.
He is terrible about that.
These tactics may be effective in persuading some people, but they do not provide logical or rational arguments for his position. Says AI.
Well, yeah, because people, and I'll tell you why the AI says that. The AI gathered data of people saying that's what Hamza does. And there are apparently enough people saying that the AI took note of it and is then incorporating that into its response to you. The hilarity of it is Hamza's worldview is so small that he can only appeal to his Islamic audience. And they'll say yes no matter what he says. He could say Lucy in the sky with Allah, and they'll cheer. He doesn't have the capacity to realize, dude, you look like a moron to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It's not because you're part of the Ummah, it's because your arguments are horrible and you treat people like garbage.
6, lack of engagement with scholarly research. Hamza sometimes failed to engage with scholarly research on Christianity and Islamic studies such as historical text, archaeological evidence, critical analysis of religious traditions. This limits his understanding of the issues and makes it difficult for him to respond effectively to Christian arguments. I thought that's spot on by AI.
Yeah, well, I have to laugh because I'll give Muhammad his due. He tries to engage with scholastic arguments. If you listen to an hour of Hamza, the only time he interacts with scholastic material is when someone brings it to his attention. He never cites any Islamic scholarship.
Yeah.
Never. I will even go so far as to say Hamza has never read it. If you gave Hamza the latest Islamic scholarship on any matter in Islam, he doesn't know what it says, and I'll guarantee you why. He's never read it. He has no interest in it.
Yeah.
He's
Yes,
what we would say in Arabic, Yahmar, you donkey.
Number 7, last one, by AI. AI's debated Hamza here. Inconsistency with other Muslim apologies. Hamza arguments sometimes conflict with those of other Muslim apologists or scholars, such as his interpretation of certain Quranic verses or his
They do.
understanding of Islamic history. This raises doubt about the consistency and coherence of Muslim apologetics as a whole.
Well, that is hilarious because it's not as if every Christian apologist knows each other, but we generally know the arguments we use and the ones we don't. We know which ones are good or bad arguments. It's hilarious, though, that the Islamic scholars all copy each other's arguments, and then they complain about a bad argument, but they don't want to say, "Oh, that was Dr. Zakir Naik. He's the one who said that, and I got it from him." Hamza is hilarious. Hamza doesn't realize, if you watch his live streams, he will do this. He will make an argument in live stream number 1. The very next live stream, he will make 3 or 4 different versions of that same argument while actually saying, "You shouldn't make this argument. It's a bad argument." Why are you making it then? You just did it for 2 live streams, Hamza.
Yeah. So we finished AI. So is it okay? Have you got enough time just to talk about historical reliability of the Gospels?
Sure. We've got plenty of historical reliability for the Gospels. We have no historic reliability for anything in the Quran.
Before we begin, 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, I went on a stream and I was amazed. Hamza said he'd like to debate, and he said it's going to be like a proper debate, like formal debate. So then he said he'd do it on Friday, a week away. Then he sent me an email, and he said he was a bit hasty. He wants to change it to next year sometime in the early new year, and there'll be 4 weeks. There'll be 4 weeks to prepare. And it's 2 weeks ago now. He's not told me anything. He's not responded. I sent him an email about a week and a half ago saying if he doesn't hurry up, I'll make a lecture. And he said, "Oh, I'm trying to put pressure on him." But he's assured me 3 times now on video and once on email that he is going to have this formal debate. It's either on the reliability of the Gospels, Paul, or the reliability of the New Testament. But what are your thoughts? I think that he's not going to debate because...
What I would do is contact the Gospel Truth, Marlon Winston. Brother Winston would love to host that debate.
Yeah.
He would love that. He's had on several Islamic scholars. Shabir Ali has been on there. I know Matt Slick's been on there. Anthony Rogers has been on there. Plenty of the people that we would know.
Can you send me the email of him?
I think he has it on his community page. If you type into YouTube The Gospel Truth, it'll pop up right there. You might have to scroll a little bit, but he's got some 7,000 or 9,000 followers.
The gospel. I'm just typing it in here. The Gospel Truth. I've just put it in there. Is that what it is there? I just put it.
Yeah, type that into YouTube. Scroll a bit, you'll see it, and it's Marlon's. I think it's at TNG Engage or something like this, or the @ handle. But yeah, he'll happily host that debate. I would tell Hamza, you want to debate on his platform, you get a hold of Marlon. He's on Messenger. He's on WhatsApp. I'm sure you can communicate, the two of you. And I would ask him, hey, would you be willing in the early part of 2020 to host a debate between Hamza and I on this subject? Marlon has been an extremely fair moderator, as well as has hosted plenty of Islamic Christian debates. So I don't see why Hamza has a reason to back out, but I have a feeling that Hamza isn't serious. So Hamza being not so serious is just going to back out.
Yeah, well, I think he's not serious because he's not. He said he'd be in touch. He said be patient. It's now 2 weeks. He's not been in touch. But maybe if Hamza's not going to debate, maybe I get in contact with this guy and maybe he could arrange
Well,
some
yeah,
other Muslim
I'm
debates.
sure Marlon will have some Islamists that would take a shot at you.
Yeah. On the historical reliability of the Gospels, can I bring some issues up and tell me what you think?
Well, why would I let you do what you're going to do on your own channel, Jason? Now, come on.
Right. I was intrigued that I was listening to Balcom and I've been reading a lot, and as you know, that a lot of scholars say the Gospels are anonymous. They were written by anonymous writers, but
Which is it?
I did some research and I found that every manuscript that we have of the Gospels, like full manuscripts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, by not one manuscript, however far back you go, does not have John for John, Mark for Mark, Luke for Luke. In other words, there's no evidence in the manuscript tradition of any anonymousness. In other words, there's always in the title who the writer is. If it was anonymous, that right at the beginning of the manuscripts that we have, we'd see changes. We'd see like someone would say, would get it wrong and say, "Oh, Luke, the Gospel of Luke is by is the Gospel of Thomas." They would get the titles wrong. They make mistakes if the titles were not there and they were anonymous right at the beginning. But there's always this consistency right as far back as you can go in the manuscript tradition that John wrote John, Matthew wrote Matthew, Luke wrote Luke. The second thing is in Pompeii, near Pompeii, they found a library, and in the library, they found hundreds of documents, ancient library, and in those documents there were plays, religious texts, philosophers' texts, and the titles were not written at the top or on the manuscript. They had labels. The manuscript title, who wrote it, was stuck on to the manuscripts, showing you that in the first century, when manuscripts were produced, they stuck the title on. They didn't write it in, they stuck it on.
They didn't simply write it,
So
they adhered it to the document.
yeah, and then the third one is the Gnostic Gospels. They don't say the Gnostic Gospels are anonymous, and yet the Gnostic Gospels come later than the four Gospels. Like they don't say, they don't say like they don't argue about the titles of they don't believe that the people who said actually wrote them, but they don't argue that these are anonymous or anything. They don't bring that up as an issue. It's not even on the radar, but yet with the four Gospels, it's always on the radar, so that they can break that connection between the author and the text and try to undermine the text. So any thoughts there, bro? Hello?
I don't know any here. Let me see what I can do.
You okay? I don't know if we've lost. So I don't know if I've lost you there, but yeah, so the manuscript tradition goes back to early times of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The Gnostic Gospels, they don't argue about anonymity there. It's not even an issue, yet they make it a big issue with the four Gospels. And thirdly, the manuscripts that they found in a library just outside Pompeii shows you that they put inscriptions at the bottom, labels at the bottom.
All right, here we go. I had to turn on the actual physical mic on the headset. There you go. No, I heard what you said. I heard what you said.
The other one is this book here, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, by Balcom. If people want to get that book, it's well worth reading. Erdman, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, this is second edition. So if anybody wants to get that copy and they're interested in these topics, I would encourage you to get hold of that. But basically, Balcom, Rudolf Balcom, who was mainly in the late 40s, 50s, 60s, who ruled the academic world, basically he was saying that with form criticism, he was saying, look, the Gospels are late, they're anonymous, and basically they're just mythological. And the reason being is they studied, he got his ideas from Scandinavian scholars. Scandinavian scholars were studying Viking history, and they were looking at oral tradition about Viking history. And so they came up with the idea, these scholars on the Viking history, that myths develop over a long period of time, and that's the kind of oral tradition that does that. So Balcom imposed this Scandinavian scholarship on Vikings and imposed it on the four Gospels and said, look, this is mythological. These are anonymous communities, and they had this oral tradition, and it became mythological, and it developed over a long period of time. Richard Balcom comes along, and he says, wait a minute. If you look at ancient historians like Plutarch, Suetonius, and Tacitus, and many others, they valued eyewitness material. They valued eyewitness material very highly, and they used what is called an inclusio. So when they're writing a history book, they would just mention the main person who they're using the eyewitness material. They don't go, I am using this person. They just talk about that person in the story, and it's a clue that that's the eyewitness to the material that they're writing. So if you look at Mark, right at the beginning, he mentions Peter. If you look at Luke, very often he mentions the women, and specific names of women. So Balcom was saying, look, there's eyewitness material in these Gospels. That's one. The second one is the study of ossuaries. There's thousands and thousands of these ossuaries where Jews have died in the first century, and they bury them in these little boxes, and they have the names of the people. And what Balcom noticed is, if you look at the size of the population of the first century and the names, the exact proportion of the population of, say, Marys, so there may be thousands of Marys, it's mentioned, it correlates perfectly to the Gospels, how it would relate in the Gospels. So, for example, if we Googled now how many Mohammeds are in Saudi Arabia, it's going to be astronomical. But if I write
it would be a giant number.
If I write a book saying that there's these people called, say there's 3 different Mohammeds in my story, and I'm writing it in Sweden, and I'm writing as if it's a historical account, it's not going to match the population size.
No, it will not. So there will be a giant discrepancy in that data. There will also be a giant discrepancy in the fact that there are other sources which will say, well, there are, say, I don't know, 15 Mohammeds in Norway, and there are 87 Mohammeds in Finland. So why would there only be 3 Mohammeds in Sweden? Yeah, so like Malcolm was saying, look, if you read the Gospels, they perfectly match the names of the population size of the names so some people that were not names that were not used very much in first century Judaism, you only get mentioned a little bit in the Gospels, but the names that are mentioned a lot in first century Judaism, like Mary, is mentioned a lot. Correct. Mary, and especially Paul. I mean, arguably one of the most reliable ways you could find the New Testament is to see what the early first century Jews were saying about their ex-Pharisee, Paul. They could not stop talking about him.
Yeah, so I'll come back to that. So that's the second plank, is this study of ossuaries, showing you that these writers, they actually were living at the time of Jesus, because they would not know the size of population, and how their writing correlates perfectly with that population. And then the other one is reading of Papias. He went back to Papias and he realized that Papias was saying that the Gospels were taken from eyewitnesses, and scholars had missed that. And there was another thing as well. But yeah, Paul as well. We'll get onto Paul in a second. But so Jesus and the eyewitnesses brings a lot of scholarship to the table, and it's changed the academic world now. The academic world for now 10, 15 years have had to take this very, very seriously. So yeah, do you want to say something about Paul?
Well, I was actually going to comment not about Paul, but because I'm less familiar with it. But if you do read the first century Jewish sources, including books like the Talmud, they can't stop talking about Paul. If Paul is an ahistoric person, the Jews certainly didn't know that, but they try to do everything they could do to discredit Saul of Tarsus. However, the argument I was going to make is the reliability of the Gospels is attested by its own canon. The Didache mentions all of the Gospels. It's much, much, much earlier than the Quran. The same is true for the Muratorian fragment and other early versions of the Bible. They all contain these works. If they exist prior to 300, 400, 500, 600, they have to be sourcing them from earlier sources.
Yeah. So it's mentioned by Irenaeus mentions the four Gospels.
That's true.
Origen mentions it. Tertullian mentions
I think
it.
Hilary of Poitiers mentions it. Tertullian mentions it, although he's really not a father. He's more of a writer. Augustine mentions it. Let's see. The Didache mentions them. Let's see. What else? Help me out here, Jay.
Ignatius and Polycarp quote the Gospels.
They do.
And also, like, there's an allusion. I think Ignatius quotes 3, and there's an allusion to 1, Mark, an allusion to Mark in the quotation. I think Matthew, Luke, and John.
I forget which father it was, but I believe they quoted from Mark 16, although I'm not recalling which one it was I was reading the other day.
I think Irenaeus quotes, scholars said the last ending of Mark's not there, but Irenaeus quotes the last ending of Mark.
But I'm not talking about the long versus the short ending. I'm saying I seem to remember one of the early fathers quoting from Mark 16, meaning that he must have, if he was quoting it, he had access to it in his time.
Yeah.
I just don't remember which one it was.
Well, Polycarp, I can't remember. I know that Polycarp quotes, I think, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Well, Martyr certainly quotes from the Gospels.
And Ignatius quotes John, Luke, and Matthew, and there's an allusion to Mark. In other words, he's using Mark's kind of language.
Right, it's using Markan language. Well, I was just saying also, I know Martyr quotes from the Gospels, so we have this within our own, I don't know if you'd call it our scholastic tradition, but certainly it's within the fathers.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to, an interesting anti-Islamic argument would be if you were to reverse that subject to say to the Muslim, where is your Quran and which parts of the Quran are quoted by your scholars? I do not think that they could make the claim Christians can. Every verse that's in the Bible is quoted somewhere within the fathers. Wow, I don't think they can make that claim about the Quran, especially with what we know now about Quranic reliability, which is a very strange term for them to use.
That's a good point. I've never thought about that, but that's a good point, Ryan. To switch
if you were to ask, well, see, the Muslims are funny because they want you to prove the reliability of your Bible, but the argument I'd make to them is that, well, that's actually not that hard to do. There are multiple ways to do it, as you were just citing, but frankly, I think the easiest way to prove the reliability of the Bible, or not so much the reliability, but the absurdity of the argument, is that the Islamic Quran, well, first of all, which Quran? They're still trying to figure out. It's certainly not Uthman's Quran. Uthman had multiple Qurans. All of the other Qurans were burned. Now, what exactly is the Quran? They could be missing entire chapters from the Quran. They're having to admit that now. I think the better argument for the Christian to say is, well, you're assuming that the Quran is a reliable book. We have manuscripts, as you were saying, that have stamped on them that they were the Gospel of Mark or the Gospel of Luke or Paul's letter to Timothy. They don't have that. They have things that are written on sticks, stones, and bones that the average Muslim can't see. Anyone can go to see certain manuscripts of the Bible, not necessarily all of them, but certain ones. They're held in various different places, in museums and monasteries or what have you. Some of them are up in the Vatican, some of them are elsewhere, but you can see these original manuscripts. You cannot see the fragments of the alleged original Quran. I think, therefore, that the Christian is mistaken to try to defend biblical reliability against the Islamists. He would do better to turn it on their heads.
Someone, the Speaker's Corner, gave me a good pointer that there's a video of John Fontaine and Hamza arguing with the Christian, and the Christian says that the Quran teaches that we should go and read the Injil, the Gospels, and
it
read
does.
The Torah. But then Hamza and John Fontaine turned around and said, no, you don't understand. We believe that there were not 4 Gospels; that there was just one Gospel given to Jesus. And the Christian guy at Speaker's Corner came up with a point. He said that Hamza will ask me for primary sources, like show me a primary source to show that this is reliable, the 4 Gospels. But the Christian guy said, but if they say that there is just one Gospel and it came to Jesus, it was given to Jesus, well, where is the primary source for this so-called one Gospel? And there is none.
Right. Not only is there not, there is one. It's a Gnostic gospel. It's not any of the 4 canonical gospels.
Yeah.
The gospels that would have been distributed in. Go ahead.
They can't claim. They can't prove or demonstrate that this specifically. I mean, they might say Gnostic, whatever, but it can easily be demonstrated.
Well, no, what I'm saying is the document, the one gospel to which they're referring is probably, I would argue, a lost one that it's been circulating in Arabia, but it would have been one of the Gnostic or pseudepigraphic documents. It certainly would not have been Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, and the Quran itself demonstrates that, because whoever wrote the Quran, we can assume it's Muhammad, but there is an argument to be made that it may not have been Muhammad. That, well, frankly, it demonstrates a total unfamiliarity to what the 4 canonical Gospels were writing about. Second, it could make some very basic blunders that if someone had even a passing familiarity with the canonical Gospels would not make. Not to mention, what do you mean there is one Gospel? There are details found within Mark's Gospel that are not listed in John's Gospel. This is why we have 4 Gospels, 4 perspectives from 4 writers. To say that we have one Gospel is to demonstrate that whoever wrote the Quran had no idea what those Gospels said. Mm-hmm. This is why I'm not saying it's wrong to defend biblical reliability. I'm saying, well, why don't Christians just aggressively go after the fact that there is zero reliability for the Quran, and we don't have to resort to non-Islamic scholars to say it?
There's more we could say. I'm just trying to think. One of the things that verifies the Gospels is enemy attestation. So you have Tacitus, you have Josephus. It was interesting. I was reading F.F. Bruce, and he was quoting, like, Josephus talks about John the Baptist. Josephus talks about James the Lord's brother. But it's an interesting what he said about the bit where it talks about, Josephus talks about the crucifixion and the resurrection, because 50% of the scholars say it's an interpolation, but F.F. Bruce believes that. But he said it could be, though, that the whole text is actually correct, because Josephus was saying it tongue-in-cheek, kind of like a bit sarcastically. There was a man, like a bit sarcastic. So if that's the case, the whole text is saying that Jesus died and that there was a belief in the resurrection.
Well, yeah.
But also,
go ahead.
But also, I just want to get this one bit in. What I found interesting, though, and I've always known this, but F.F. Bruce brought it up, that textually, the textual criticism of that passage is F.F. Bruce was saying most of the manuscripts, if not all, but at least most of them, talking 99% of them, there aren't a lot of them, there's only a handful of these manuscripts, have the whole of that text in. In other words, if there was an interpolation, you would see that there were manuscripts, there'd be a good few manuscripts with the interpolation in, but there's a consistency within the manuscript tradition of all of that verse of Josephus in. I thought that was interesting.
I don't know if I'm familiar enough with that to discuss that.
So, enemy attestation, enemies.
We also have Trajan. It's not just simply one or two. We have about 10 different sources that I could think of where you have enemy attestation to the reliability of the Gospels, down to almost the letter, recanting the exact things the Christians would have read in their Gospels, which is what they state: believing in a Christ, meeting on the first day of a week. This man allegedly rose from the dead, they say, and he came for the redemption of men's sins. The sort of things that Christians have always been saying, because that's what our Gospels say.
Yeah. So enemy attestation. Now I was listening to Bart Ehrman and his criticisms. One of the arguments that he makes to say that our brother Ryan has gone. Yeah, I'm sure he'll be back. Ryan will be back. I hope you come back. But one of the issues that Bart Ehrman makes is in his books and writings is that the Gospels could not have been written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John because they weren't that educated. This is a foolish argument because, number one, there were hundreds of synagogues around Jerusalem, and there was a synagogue at Capernaum. These synagogues were education centers for people, and there was also finances to help. Hiya, bro, you disappeared.
Hey. Yeah, sorry about that. I've just got about 5 odd more minutes. I have to head on to the store today while I've got time. But you were talking about enemy attestation when I was still in here.
Yeah, I was talking about Bart Ehrman, and one of the arguments that he uses is that they could not have written, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John could not have written the Gospels because they weren't educated, because there's a verse the Sanhedrin say that they're not educated. But the point is that that reference is probably about they're not like educated in the sense of PhD in their mindset kind of education. But in Jerusalem and around Jerusalem, Erdesheim says there were 600 synagogues in and around Jerusalem. Now, even if there was only 300, those synagogues, they had finances. There were money given to the poor, so even the poor people could go to these synagogues, and they were education centers.
Right.
So you got an education there. So that's number one. So they weren't just like dummies that didn't know anything. Matthew,
these weren't.
He worked for the tax people, so he could. And thirdly, if you read the book of Revelation, Jesus says, write this down. So in the first century, they were well able to write things down.
Right, meaning John, that would assume John would have been literate.
Yeah. And also fishermen were not as poor as we think, that they earned a good living. So they weren't just like small working class uneducated people.
They would be the ancient equivalent of what we call blue collar.
Yeah.
Just because somebody's a blue collar man, a businessman, is not necessarily an educated man. but he's certainly not a stupid man either.
Yeah. So this collapses Bart Ehrman's argument about they couldn't have written. Also,
Yeah.
if you do research, which I did some years ago, debating atheists, also every area had a library. Rome had made sure that every city, every key place, there was a library where people could go study philosophy, and there were libraries dotted all around the ancient world, even in Israel or and Egypt and places like that. So the idea that they didn't have access to education and they couldn't write is stupid.
It is.
So
no, I mean, what do you want me to do? Wax eloquent? It's part of the whole argument. Your Bible was written by a bunch of cattlemen.
yeah.
Anyone who says that is supremely ignorant. And I don't know how else to say this, but you've been either following people that have repeated this argument to you, or you're just plain stupid and don't want to admit. Moses was a general in Pharaoh's army. He would have been a highly educated individual. King David, highly educated. Every king was tasked with writing out a copy of the law. They were literate. It was a basic expectation. When we come to the New Testament, as you said, Peter was not some ignorant person. He was the ancient equivalent of a blue-collar worker. He was a businessman.
And just on Peter, if you look at his sermon, is it Acts chapter 2? You do a survey of his sermon and the quotations. Many quotations of the Old Testament showing you he was highly literate.
Yes, he was very literate. It showed that he had read to him the Bible rather frequently. It's not as if he simply came along one day and decided to copy these Christians because he liked them. He clearly studied the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Jay, as you English say, I'm going to have to love you and leave you. I have to get on.
All right. God bless you, Ryan. Lovely to see you, bro.
Likewise, brother. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. John Mack, Irish, USA, Emmanuel, and another person, all you people out there, Happy New Year. God bless you. Love to everybody out there. We just looked on the stream, AI versus Hamza. AI versus Hamza. We looked at, I typed in AI debate Hamza, give us the weakest arguments of Hamza, and AI gave us the weakest arguments against, the weakest arguments that Hamza comes up with. And then we're looking at the historical reliability of the Gospels. I'd encourage you to get hold of this book if you want to study the historical reliability of the Gospels. Very, very helpful book. Richard Balcom, very informative, and encourage you to read this book. I'm going to just show you some books that I'm reading. Richard A. Burridge, 4 Gospels, 1 Jesus. He is instrumental in encouraging scholars to look at the Gospels historically. Yeah, John, it was Ryan. Yeah. 4 Gospels, 1 Jesus by Burridge, published by SBCK. Not a very good publisher, but I'm reading this. I'm reading this. Alfred Erdesheim, The Life and Times of the Messiah, Jesus the Messiah, Erdesheim. Get a copy of this. Really, really excellent book to read. I'm reading that. The Jesus Crisis, Inroads of Historical Criticism in Evangelical Scholarship by Robert L. Thomas, published by Kriegel, looks at form criticism and things like that. Very, very interesting, very, very helpful. Reading that, excellent. So that's the book there if you want to get hold of it. By John MacArthur's team. A Guide to the Gospels by Scroggy. Excellent book. This is a beautiful book. It's an old book, but oh, this is a beautiful book. Get yourself a copy of this and read it in the new year. I recommend it. Beautiful, very nice book to read, very easy to read, very enjoyable, very, very spiritual book. Oh, it's beautiful, and I'm enjoying reading that. A Guide to the Gospels. Excellent. Scroggy. Top man. And I'm reading this. Paul Barnett, Messiah, Jesus, the Evidence of History. Excellent book. So, yeah. And Tyndale IVP series.